I didn't hear the crying at first. It was too faint, lost beneath the Sunday bells and the chatter of morning greetings. But when I opened the cardboard donation box sitting on the church steps of St. Matthew's in Asheville, I froze. Inside, beneath layers of damp coats and old scarves, was a Doberman puppy so thin I could count every rib pressing through his matted black and tan fur. He trembled uncontrollably as if his tiny body had forgotten how to breathe. His coat was soaked through, clinging to his skin. His eyes, half open and clouded, looked empty, pleading but too weak to make a sound. The air carried the smell of wet paper and mildew, that familiar scent of poverty and rain. But today it burned sharper. Someone had folded him into this box of donations as if he were another unwanted object, a gift to pity. A woman beside me gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Another whispered, "My God, who could do this?" But most people just kept walking. They dropped clothes into the box, smiled politely, nodded, and moved on. No one looked down. No one saw the dying puppy lying right beneath their feet. The world kept turning as if one small life gasping for air wasn't enough reason to stop. My name is Mark Ellison. I'm 54. I've volunteered here for nearly 10 years. I've seen all kinds of hardship, ripped clothes, worn-out shoes, forgotten toys. But never a living being abandoned like this. People think they've grown numb to cruelty until it looks back at them with eyes still holding on to hope. The Doberman shivered when I reached toward him, flinching as though my touch might finish what the cold had started. His breathing was so faint, I had to bend close to see his chest rise and fall. "Easy, little one," I whispered. My voice cracked on the last word. Lydia, who ran the church's soup kitchen, knelt beside me. Her hands trembled as she brushed aside the pile of clothes. "He's just a baby," she murmured, her fingertips grazing the icy paw. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The sight of that fragile creature left like a forgotten prayer made something inside me tighten. The church bells faded into the mist. I wasn't sure what came first, anger or shame, maybe both. People still passed by, talking, laughing, pretending not to notice. Life went on. But not for him, not yet. He barely stirred now. His breath was shallow, fragile, a single thread between life and death. I slid my hands beneath him, lifting with care. He was so light I was afraid he might dissolve if I held him too tightly. His eyes fluttered once more, cloudy, then closed. He was still breathing, barely, but that was enough. Enough to break something open inside me. Lydia steadied the box in her arms, and together we hurried inside the church, slow, deliberate steps, as if carrying a small soul waiting to be redeemed. The air inside the church felt entirely different. When Lydia and I carried the box and the bells, the chatter, even time itself, seemed to slow. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering across the floor like shards of colored glass glinting over the faces of those preparing for service. They stopped, looked at us, then down at the box. "What's going on?" a man asked. I didn't answer. I simply bowed my head and lifted the corner of the blanket that wrapped the puppy. No one spoke. For a moment, the only sound was the faint, uneven breathing of that fragile creature trembling in my hands. A boy dropped a cookie. The sharp crack as it hit the floor echoed through the stillness and vanished. Lydia knelt beside me, her fingers trembling as she touched the Doberman's thin body. Its fur was tangled, clumped against its skin. Maybe rain, maybe sweat, maybe tears. "Oh God," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's still breathing, but barely." I nodded, my heartbeat pounding hard, too hard. I've driven people through hurricanes, seen wrecks, watched bodies collapse between steel and snow, but never had my hands tremble like this. I brushed my fingers over his head. He was so cold it clung to my skin. Lydia murmured, almost to herself, "Who could do something like this? Who could leave something so small, so helpless?" I had no answer. Some questions don't need one because the truth is already too cruel. An older woman stepped forward, clutching the cross at her neck. "Put him near the fireplace," she said, her voice unsteady but firm. "If there's any soul that needs warmth today, it's his." We did as she said. Lydia spread a dry cloth over the long wooden table where communion bread was usually placed, then laid the puppy down. The old furnace groaned softly, pushing out a thin breath of warmth that rose like fog. I sat beside him, holding his tiny paw in my hand. No response. Only that faint, fragile breathing like a draft slipping through a cracked door. His eyelids twitched once, then went still. Lydia fetched a warm towel, pressed it gently against his back, and wiped him clean. She said nothing except for the sound of a quiet swallow now and then. Each time I looked over, she was trying to smile, but her lips couldn't lift. Something unfamiliar settled in my chest. Not pity fear. Fear that if I looked away, he would stop breathing. Fear that I might become just another person who walked past and did nothing. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, uneven drops tapping against the old church roof. No one left the room. A child folded his hands. A man bowed his head. Even the old pastor came forward, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Faith," he said quietly, "isn't always about believing in miracles. Sometimes it's about believing we're not allowed to stand still." The words hit me like a strike to the heart. I looked at Lydia. She nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "There's a vet 2 blocks away," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "We have to take him right now." I stood up without thinking. The cardboard box was soaked and falling apart, so I pulled off my coat and wrapped the puppy inside it. He flinched, gasping a quick, fragile sound like a clock ticking toward its last beat. "Hang in there, kid," I whispered. "Just a little longer." Outside, the sky hung heavy and gray. Rain drifted down in fine silver threads. I moved quickly across the brick courtyard, my boots slapping against the wet ground. Lydia followed close behind, holding the coat tight around the puppy. Behind us, the church doors closed with a low echo like the end of indifference itself. I opened the door of my old pickup. The seat still smelled of gasoline and road dust. Lydia slid in beside me, the puppy pressed to her chest, her hand on his heart, counting every breath. I turned the key. The engine coughed to life, rough and uneven like a broken prayer. We didn't speak. The road ahead was empty. Rain traced long lines down the windshield. I drove fast, but not too fast. I was afraid the bumps might hurt him, and in that silence something became clear. There was nothing left to say. Silence said it all. A life was dying, and we 2 ordinary people had simply decided not to let it. Not because we believed in miracles, but because at some point you stop standing still. The rain grew heavier the moment we left the church steps. The first drops hit the windshield hard and fast, each one echoing like the pounding of my own heart. Sunday mornings in Asheville were usually quiet, but today the road stretched ahead, endless and gray. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Beside me, Lydia held the Doberman puppy against her chest, trying to keep the last bit of warmth from slipping away with the cold rain. My coat, now wrapped around him, was soaked through, turning dark and heavy. Every fragile breath that came from that tiny body cut through me like glass. "Is he still breathing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lydia pressed her hand to his chest. "Yes," she said softly, "but it's faint." The rhythm of the rain mixed with the wiper's dull, steady beat, thump-thump, like a clock counting down to something none of us could stop. Streetlights smeared across the wet pavement, stretching into trembling ribbons of gold. The cab filled with cold air, the smell of gasoline and wet iron thick around us. I don't remember how long I drove. All I know is that every time the truck jolted, Lydia tightened her arms, whispering as if praying, "Don't give up, little one. You hear me, don't give up." I glanced in the mirror. His small ears hung limp. A faint rasp came from his throat, his body shivering in uneven bursts. His breaths were broken, thread-thin. Each time I heard that fragile sound, my hand shook harder, and my foot pressed heavier on the gas. But the road wouldn't end. It just kept stretching forward. How much farther? Lydia's voice was raw. 8 minutes, I said, if the lights stay green. She nodded, eyes locked on the puppy trembling in her arms. The light ahead turned yellow as we hit the intersection. I pressed down and the truck slid through a puddle, throwing gray water high into the air. I didn't care. The only thing in my head was this: if we slowed down, he might not make it. "Mark," Lydia said hoarsely. "He's freezing. My hands aren't warm enough." I yanked my scarf off and tossed it to her. "Use that. Wrap him tighter." She did, her fingers trembling. I saw her lips pale, her eyes filled with helpless fear. My own jaw was clenched so tight I could taste blood. When we turned onto Haywood Street, the sign for Mountain View Animal Clinic appeared through the downpour, a glowing white beacon slicing through the storm like a rescue light. I hit the brakes hard in front of the entrance. Lydia was out of the truck before it stopped moving, shouting, "Help, please!" A young nurse at the reception desk sprinted over. The moment she saw what Lydia was holding, she yelled back inside, "Doctor, now!" I followed her in. The floor tiles were slick and cold, the fluorescent lights blindingly bright. The sharp smell of antiseptic mixed with rainwater clean, but metallic sterile, but alive with panic. A man in his 30s appeared. Exhaustion on his face, but focus in his eyes. He knelt beside the puppy, pressed his hand to its tiny chest, and said quickly, "Heating pad. Thermometer. IV fluids, now." 2 nurses appeared instantly, moving with practiced precision. I stood still, rain dripping from my sleeves, hands shaking uncontrollably. The doctor placed a stethoscope against the puppy's chest. The room fell utterly silent. Then he looked up, his voice calm but cutting like ice. "If you'd come an hour later, he wouldn't have made it." My heart stopped for a moment. Lydia covered her mouth, tears spilling down her face. The doctor added softer this time, "But he still has a chance. It's thin, but it's there." He turned to us, eyes gentler now. "You got here just in time." Those 3 words, "just in time," broke something inside me. My legs gave out and I sank into a chair. Through the glass wall of the treatment room, I watched as they laid the Doberman puppy on a heated blanket, an IV line in his tiny leg. His chest rose and fell faintly, like a flicker of fire fighting against the wind. I was trembling, not from cold, but from fear, and from hope. The pastor's words echoed in my head. Faith isn't believing in miracles, it's refusing to stand still. Maybe this was what he meant. That moment when you run, even when you don't know if you'll make it in time. Lydia sat beside me, hands clasped tight. "Do you think he'll make it?" she asked. I looked through the glass, my voice low and rough. "I don't know, but he hasn't given up, and neither can we." Just then, the door opened. A nurse stepped out holding my soaked heating scarf, a tired smile on her face. "We can hear his heartbeat now," she said. "He's responding." Lydia broke down sobbing into her hands. I bowed my head and let out a long, shaking breath like the storm had finally left my chest. Outside, the rain still fell, but this time it sounded different. No longer desperate, just gentle, like time itself had slowed, giving one small life the chance to fight for one more day. The white fluorescent light spread a cold, sterile stillness across the room. The rain had stopped, leaving only the steady rhythm of the IV drip tick, 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 like a fragile heartbeat, trying to hold on. I sat in the corner, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the tiny body wrapped in the warming blanket. His black and tan fur was still damp, clinging to skin so thin that his shoulder blades rose sharply beneath it. His ears drooped, twitching slightly whenever a draft slipped through the window frame. "Heart rate's weak." The doctor murmured, his voice so low it sounded like he was speaking to himself. but more stable now. Lydia stood beside the table, eyes, red hands folded together as if in prayer. She didn't touch the puppy, only stayed close, afraid even the gentlest motion might snap that delicate thread of life. "Does he have a chance?" I asked quietly. The doctor exhaled, glanced over. Yes, a thin one, like mist. But it's there. Some come in weaker than this and still choose to live. I looked down. His tiny chest rose and fell softly like a breath of wind crossing an open field. Lydia leaned closer, whispering, "Brave little one, don't give up." No one spoke after that. Only the sound of the drip, the faint patter of rain fading outside, and the warmth from the heating pad slowly spreading through the room. I thought of the church, the soggy cardboard box, those cloudy eyes, my own hesitation before touching him. Something small opened inside me, something that told me I could never look away again. I stepped closer to the table, voice low. "This boy needs a name." Lydia looked up. "A name, yeah," I said softly. "We can't just keep calling him it." I stared at the fragile creature lying beneath the white light and said slowly, "I'll call him Rook." Rook, Lydia repeated, tasting the sound of it. In chess, I explained the rook moves straight ahead, never backward. It's the shield, the protector. My throat tightened. And this little guy, no matter how small, how weak, he's still holding on. He hasn't backed down. Lydia smiled faintly, her eyes glimmering in the pale light. "Rook," she whispered, resting her hand gently on his head. "That's a strong name." The moment the sound left her lips, his body stirred. Just slightly, but I saw it. One paw trembled like a reflex. The doctor froze. Lydia held her breath. My heart pounded as I stepped closer. "Rook," I whispered, "you hear me? You've got a name now." Rook. His small ears flicked once more, then went still. But I knew he heard, I could feel it. The doctor said softly, "Sometimes they don't understand the words, but they recognize the voice. The sound of being wanted." I nodded, my throat thick. The light above caught the sheen of his fur, turning it silver like metal, being forged back to life under human hands. I brushed my fingers across his head. The fur was still damp, but warmer now. "Rook," I murmured, "don't give up. You've got a name that means someone's waiting for you to come back." Lydia slid down beside me, resting her head against the wall. "I think he understands," she said softly. "I think so too," I whispered. Outside, the rain had stopped. A soft gray light spread through the window. The first car of the morning passed its hum, mingling with the puppy's faint, steady breathing. I watched his chest rise and fall, each breath a small victory. And in that moment, I understood miracles don't fall from the sky. They begin with a simple human choice not to walk away. I whispered before leaving the room, "Sleep, Rook. When you wake up, the world will be different." Night had already fallen by the time I brought Rook home. The damp chill of Asheville still lingered in the air, and when I opened the door, the house seemed to shrink into itself, as if exhaling after a long, silent day. I switched on the small lamp in the corner. A soft yellow glow spread across the old rug, the framed family photos on the wall, and the familiar emptiness I'd grown used to over the years. Rook lay curled inside a thick blanket, a tiny ember left from a dying fire. The doctor had told me to watch him through the night, keep him warm. Keep him still. I set him beside the armchair right where the light brushed gently across his small face. He drifted off quickly. His breathing was shallow but steady. I sat there listening, watching, afraid of the silence. Not the silence of the house, but the silence that lives between two breaths, the one where life can slip away unnoticed. I leaned down, resting my hand on his chest. It rose weakly beneath my palm. Each time a beat faltered. My heart clenched tighter. "Don't go, Rook," I whispered, not tonight. The wall clock ticked softly, tick, tick, tick. The slow music of time passing. I don't know how long I sat there, an hour, maybe a lifetime. In that dim light, an old memory surfaced. When I was 12, we had a small dog named Jasper. One winter night, he got trapped outside during a snowstorm. I ran out barehanded, searching through the white wind. When I finally found him, his body was stiff, frozen in my arms. I held him all night, praying my warmth could bring him back. But Jasper never did. Since then, I've hated quiet nights. Because silence always comes hand in hand with loss. Rook stirred. A faint whimper escaped his throat. I jerked upright. His eyes opened, just a sliver still cloudy, but I caught the reflection of the yellow lamp inside them. "It's okay, kid," I whispered. "It's warm here." I stroked his head gently. The fur was rough but drier now, carrying a trace of warmth. I pulled the blanket higher around him and sat closer, letting his tiny body rest against my leg. The house grew so still that I could hear our breaths blending together. Outside, the wind swept through the oak trees, their branches whispering in the dark. Around midnight, his breathing changed. It grew fast, uneven, as if he were running in a dream or fighting some invisible battle. I bent closer, my hand pressed to his chest. His heartbeat was erratic. Not strong, not weak, just lost like a rhythm that had forgotten its way. "No, no, no," I murmured, my mouth dry. I gathered him in my arms, pressing him to my chest, trying to match our hearts. "Listen, Rook, please don't give up. You made it this far. Just hold on till morning." He twitched, turning his head toward me, his tiny mouth opening with a faint gasp. And then silence. The room went too still. I froze. Didn't move, didn't breathe. Only the lamp kept burning, casting soft light over the quiet blanket. In that silence, I heard myself whisper, hoarse and broken, "Jasper. Don't take him. Not this time." Then something brushed against my hand. Rook. His paw jerked once, then again, and then a breath. Weak, but real. Tears spilled before I could stop them. The warmth from that fragile body spread through my arms, reaching my heart like sunlight through frost. I pulled the blanket tighter and held him close, leaning back in the chair, until our breathing fell into sync once more. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time, like a quiet reassurance. I stayed that way for the rest of the night, unmoving, sleepless, just watching each breath grow steadier, longer. Rook was still there, and I felt something return to me, something I thought I'd lost years ago. A chance, a promise, a small miracle I never believed I'd be given again. When dawn finally broke, the first light slipped through the curtains and fell across the blanket. Rook stretched his legs, kicking softly at the air, as if chasing something in a dream. I smiled, my hand still resting over his chest. For the first time in years, my heart beat in rhythm with another living soul. Slow, steady, real. We made it. "Rook," I whispered. He didn't answer, but the even sound of his breathing was the most beautiful reply I had ever heard. That morning was unusually still. The first light of day streamed through the window, turning the small room into a quiet painting of gold. Rook lay curled up in a beige blanket, his chest rising and falling in an even rhythm. I sat by the window with a cup of hot coffee in my hands, staring out at the backyard. The grass was still damp with dew, and Asheville was asleep. No cars, no voices, only a few sparrows are playing along the wooden fence. Peace, something I thought I'd forgotten how to feel after the night we'd just lived through. I set my cup down and looked at Rook. He opened his eyes slowly, gray-brown pupils catching the morning light. His little ears twitched. When I said softly, "Good morning, Rook," he blinked, as if recognizing my voice. That look, it caught in my chest. Not pity, but something gentler, deeper, the strange ache of seeing yourself reflected in the eyes of a creature that had brushed so close to death. I lifted him carefully and carried him to the porch. The air was crystal clear, cool, but not harsh. The scent of damp wood and fresh earth lingered in the breeze. I set him down on the soft grass, keeping my hands close just in case. Rook struggled to stand. His front legs trembled, his back paws slipped slightly on the wet ground. "It's okay. Take your time," I whispered. He looked at me, tilted his head, then tried again. One step, then another. Each movement was wobbly, but it was effort, raw, determined effort. Sunlight slipped through the oak leaves, laying a thin silver line across his back. His black and tan coat, though still sparse, seemed to catch the light differently, now alive. His tail twitched once, then stilled. And for the first time I saw something new in his eyes, curiosity. Lydia showed up mid-morning carrying a small bag of dog food and a few bottles of warm milk. She stopped at the porch, her face breaking into a smile when she saw him standing. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "Look who's up already." Rook tilted his head, sniffing the air. When his eyes met hers, something unexpected happened. He stepped forward. Slowly, shakily, but with purpose. Lydia knelt down, arms open. "That's it, Rook. That's it, boy." He stopped right in front of her, pressing his nose gently into her palm. And then, it happened. A sound, faint, cracked almost like a cough, held back too long. But it wasn't a cough. It was his first bark. I froze. That fragile sound broke through the quiet like a pulse, a heartbeat you didn't realize you'd been waiting to hear. Lydia covered her mouth, her eyes wet. Rook barked again, still raspy, still uneven, but stronger. I laughed, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. "Well, my boy," I said, voice trembling. "Was it you talking?" Rook turned toward me, tail wagging faintly, eyes bright in the sunlight. I knelt beside him, tapping my hand gently against his chest. "Yeah, that's right. You did it." Lydia stood pulling out her phone, trying to capture the moment, but I shook my head. "No, let it just be this." She smiled softly. "All right, but I don't think I'll ever forget that sound." Rook barked a few more times before collapsing back onto the grass, exhausted. I scooped him up, his warmth seeping into my palms. "You scared me there, kid," I murmured, my throat tightening. Lydia smiled faintly. "No," he reminded us of something, that small kind of faith we thought we'd lost. She left soon after, and Rook and I stayed on the porch. The sun climbed higher, flooding the garden with light. Rook rested on my lap, his head on my arm, eyes closed in peace. My fingers traced the small scar on his neck, the mark left by the rope that once held him, and I wondered how something so fragile could be so strong. By noon, a gentle breeze carried the scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I turned on the little recorder on my table just to capture the sounds of the morning. And through the wind I heard it again, Rook's bark. Soft, uneven, but alive. I smiled. "You're not just surviving, Rook," I said, quietly. "You're learning to tell the world you're still here." Later that afternoon, as the sun sank low, I saw him lying near the door, staring out at the yard. His ears perked, his head tilted. Then he barked once more, gentle searching, as if calling to someone out there. I understood. He wasn't afraid of silence anymore. And for the first time in years, my house was filled with the one sound I'd been waiting to hear. Not the clock, not the rain, but the voice of a small soul telling the world in his own way that he'd chosen to stay. That spring came earlier than usual. The snow melted fast, revealing damp soil and the first shy blades of grass. I sat on the porch steps, a mug of coffee in hand, watching the sun climb slowly over the old barn roof. The air smelled of sap and wet wood, that scent that tells you life is coming back. Out in the yard, Rook was running through the grass, strong and sure. His black and tan coat glistened in the early light. No one would have recognized the fragile puppy who once lay dying inside a donation box outside St. Matthew's Church. He was part of this place now, part of me. When Rook stopped and looked up, his eyes met mine, calm, trusting, so alive it warmed something deep inside my chest. "Come here, boy," I called. He sprinted toward me, kicking up bits of soil as he ran, tail wagging wildly. When he reached me, he sat close, resting his head against my knee, his breath steady and warm. "Good job," I murmured, fingers brushing his neck. "You did so well, Rook," he answered with his eyes, no bark, no movement needed. Some things don't need words to be understood. Lydia came by around noon, carrying a basket of fresh bread and her usual bright smile. "Brought lunch for both of you," she said. Rook bounded over, tail spinning like a pinwheel. Lydia laughed, setting the basket down. "I can't believe how fast he's grown." "Yeah," I nodded. "He eats well, sleeps well, and lives like he means it." We sat in the yard watching Rook chase a drifting leaf. For a while, neither of us spoke. Only the wind whispered through the trees and the soft thud of paws against grass filled the silence. "I still remember that morning," Lydia said quietly. "If you hadn't opened that box?" I shook my head. "If we hadn't stopped." She smiled. "You're right, if we hadn't stopped." Her words lingered light but heavy enough to tighten my throat. Rook ran back toward me. Then a small branch clutched proudly in his mouth, eyes sparkling with victory. I laughed. "All right, little warrior, you win." He dropped the branch at my feet, then stretched out on the grass, gazing up at the sky. The sunlight fell across his body, a warm golden light I'll never forget. Because it didn't just shine on a once-abandoned dog. It shone on something inside me, a part of my humanity that had gone cold and was now awake again, stirred by a creature that never spoke a word. That afternoon, I took Rook back to St. Matthew's. The red brick steps still carried faint marks of rain, and the donation boxes stood where they always had. I lingered there for a long while at the spot where everything began. The church bells rang deep and warm, spreading across the small square. Rook stood beside me, silent. He sniffed around the base of the box, ears pricked, then turned toward me. "Yes," I said softly, "right here. This is where you were found." I knelt and placed my hand on his head. "Do you remember, Rook? You were so weak, I was afraid you'd disappear if I touched you. But you didn't give up. You taught me how not to give up." He looked at me for a long moment. Then, instead of barking, lifted one paw and placed it gently on my hand. A small gesture, but enough to choke me up. They say animals can't speak, can't say thank you. But I believe if there's a language beyond words, it's in their eyes, in that soft touch of a paw that says more than speech ever could. I stood. "Come on, old friend," I said. "We've got more roads ahead." Rook barked once, a deep, clear sound, no longer fragile. The echo bounced through the courtyard, up the church walls, blending with the last bell of the afternoon. We walked down those old steps together past the people bringing donations. A few children turned to stare. "Mister, your dog's beautiful," one of them shouted. I smiled, bending to pat his head. "He is," I said, "but not just on the outside." A gentle breeze passed through. The late sun glimmered on Rook's coat, turning it into a strip of molten bronze beneath the light. And I knew somewhere within every strand of that fur, the chill of that fateful morning still lingered, the cold we had survived together. That night back home, Rook curled up beside the chair. I looked at him, and a feeling filled my chest, one that no word could quite hold. Not pity, not gratitude, something deeper understanding, that sometimes it's the voiceless ones who teach us how to listen. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of a candle. Outside, the spring wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of warm earth. Rook lifted his head, eyes meeting mine, still the same as the first day, deep still and filled with a quiet promise that every wound can heal. I smiled softly. "Good night, Rook," I whispered. He didn't answer, just closed his eyes and breathed evenly, head resting against my leg. And I understood between us words were no longer needed. Only warmth, and the compassion that reminds us sometimes saving one small life is how we save the human part of ourselves.